Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. More preeminent. All glories to the assembled. All glories to the assembled. All glories to the assembled. All glories to Sri Guru and Gaurav. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. 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 Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Okay, so we're going to go on with another different topic with the same seminar, Srila Prabhupada, the Living Bhagavatam. Today's topic is cooperation. That's big subject, of course. We're only doing one session, so we can't really cover very much. But in my readings, at least of Prabhupada's works and the experiences that I had traveling with him, and also recently I've been reading Prabhupada's letters. So now I'm up to mid-1972. So one thing that strikes me always is the amount of effort that Prabhupada had to put into getting devotees to cooperate with each other. Giving them Krishna consciousness, philosophy is one thing, but getting everybody to work on the same platform is another. And it comes up repeatedly. One of the main issues, always trying to get devotees to work with each other, respect each other, cooperate together. So there's lots of material to draw from on this topic. I've arbitrarily picked a few things. This is not necessarily the whole thing, but I hope to illustrate it with a few examples, the importance of it. So, you have to excuse me, sometimes I have to change my position. Okay, so there's a letter from Prabhupada to Kirtananda, October of 1973. This is a well-quoted letter. It's good to refresh our minds on it. And it's a very important letter. So Prabhupada's telling Kirtananda, don't move that, this is where I want it. Sorry. Prabhupada tells Kirtananda, he says, now this displeasing of God, brothers, has already begun, and it gives me too much agitation in my mind. Our Gaudiya Math people fought with one another after the demise of Guru Maharaj. But my disciples have already begun fighting even in my presence, so I'm greatly concerned about it. Following in the footsteps, or footprints, of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Trinada Pisani Chena Tarora Vivasaišnana, Amani Namana Dana Kirtaniya Sudahariyi. One should chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, thinking oneself lower than the straw in the street. One should be more tolerant than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respects to others. In such a state of mind, one can chant the holy name of the Lord constantly. So we should always remember this verse and be as tolerant as a tree as we execute the Krishna consciousness movement. Without this mentality, we cannot be successful. Very important. Without this mentality, we cannot be successful. Material nature means dissension and disagreement, especially in Kali Yuga. But for this Krishna consciousness movement, its success will depend on agreement, even though there are varieties of engagements. In the material world there are varieties, but there's no agreement. In the spiritual world, there are varieties, but there is agreement. That is the difference. The materialist, without being able to adjust the varieties and the disagreements, makes everything zero. They cannot come into agreement with variety. But if we keep Krishna in the center, then there'll be agreement in variety. This is called unity in diversity. So that catchphrase has become well known, unity in diversity. I'm therefore suggesting that all of our men meet in Mayapur every year during the birth anniversary of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. With all the GBC and senior men present, we should discuss how to make unity in diversity. But if we fight on account of diversity, it is simply the material platform. Please try to maintain the philosophy of unity in diversity. That will make our movement successful. One section of men have already gone out. Therefore, we must be very careful to maintain unity in diversity and remember the story of Aesop's fables, of the father with many children and the bundle of sticks. When the father asked his children to break the bundle of sticks wrapped in a bag, none of them could do it. But when he removed the sticks from the bag and tried one by one, then the sticks were easily broken. So, this is the strength in unity. If we are bunched up, we can never be broken. But when divided, then we can become broken very easily. So it's an important letter. Prabhupada mentions there in particular about this GBC meeting being held every year in Mayapur. Because this letter was written on the 18th of October 1973. I'm going to stand up a little bit here. Make it a little bit easier for me. So, I don't know whether this will work or not. I don't always stand up either, but because the situation was that Prabhupada had started the GBC in 1970. There was some kind of a deviation that was occurring amongst some of the managers at that time. As a result of that, to correct it, Prabhupada forced, I wouldn't say, well, not exactly forced, but he pushed 4 of his leading men into taking sannyas. Brahmananda and Gagamuni, of course, Vishnu Jan Swami, and Sabal Swami. And that was an attempt to correct them individually and to also keep some unity in the society, because there was a divergent philosophy that was being preached by them, which basically Prabhupada saw as a challenge to his own authority as the founder Acharya. So it's interesting how he dealt with it. It spun out for several months. And then Prabhupada took this decision to make these men sannyas. What that meant was that they would be out of management. At that time, no sannyasis were allowed to manage. There were no sannyasis, except Kirtanananda. He was the only one. But in 1970, then there was about 6 new sannyasis that were made. And the rule at that time was that no sannyasi should be involved in management. That was how Prabhupada defined it in terms of Kirtanananda's relationship to New Vrindavan. There's several letters from Hayagriva asking, who's in charge here? Is it Kirtanananda as the sannyasi, or is it me as the temple president? They started New Vrindavan together, but then who's really actually the boss? And Prabhupada answered it nicely by saying that Kirtanananda should travel and preach. And he should just come and just oversee, but not get involved in the daily management. And that was the temple president's business. So that was the standard. And Prabhupada, therefore, by making these 4 men take sannyas, he was knocking them out of management. So they had no more influence on that level. Then at the same time, his idea was that they would spread the movement. As sannyasis, that was their requirement, part of the ashram. Now you have to travel and preach and just dedicate your life solely and wholly, to the glories of the holy name. So that was one measure that he took. At the same time, I think they took sannyas around about the 20th or 22nd of July in 1970. A week later, Prabhupada then officially formed the GBC. And he'd already started talking about that previously. He'd been in communication with Brahmananda on the east coast, Tamal Krishna on the west coast. And in fact, Tamal Krishna was already functioning as a kind of GBC. He had been sent, I think in 69 or 70, to England. And he was to help the preaching there, but also in France and Germany. And Prabhupada told him, don't stay in any one place. Your business is to move around and check the standards in all these other centres. So when Tamal spent a few months in London, and I don't think he'd written regular reports to Srila Prabhupada, Prabhupada wrote to him and said, why are you staying in one place? I didn't send you there to sit down in one place. You have to move. You have to check all these other places. So effectively, he was already working as a GBC. He had several temples to look after and oversee. And then Prabhupada formalized the GBC in late July 1970 by actually forming them. Now 12 members of the GBC. So out of them, I think 11 of them were householders. One of them was a brahmachari, Bali Madam. And they were given different areas of responsibility in the society. But the main thing was to, what Prabhupada did was create a level of management another level of management between himself and the temple presidents. Up till that point, each temple president individually reported to Prabhupada. But to ease the burden on himself, then Prabhupada created this new layer of management and started directing devotees to consult with the GBCs whenever they had any problems. And of course there were plenty of problems on small scales and big scales. And therefore Prabhupada needed this extra help. Plus he had in mind what he's mentioning here in this letter about what happened to the Gaudiya Math. Now we have our Pranava Prabhu here. He's our ISKCON expert now on Gaudiya history, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and his next volume of his work is going to be about what happened after 1937. So basically what happened was that they broke up. They couldn't agree. Although they had, philosophically a very powerful platform to pull themselves all together on. But individually, they had their own ideas about how it should be applied. And especially with this question of Acharya, who's going to be in charge next. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, of course, was the Acharya, but there was one man who was the main manager, Kunja Babu, Kunja Vihari, and he was not a popular man because he was a manager. Not just a manager, he was the manager. And he was a householder, but he was also managing all the sannyasis. And there was a lot of dissent, disagreement, unhappiness with him. He was quite a fairly overbearing personality. And when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati left, he took it upon himself to become the next Acharya. He was already managing everything anyway. And so he just basically declared that he's now the next Acharya. But that was not in agreement with some of the other members. They put somebody else up as a competitor Acharya, then there was a big fight. The whole thing fell apart. The end result was that what had been a very unified and tremendously potent preaching organization fell by the wayside. It was shattered into pieces. It was still going on in small efforts here and there. But the unity that had been forged by the presence of power, spiritual power of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was lost. And as a result of that, everybody suffered. So Prabhupada was very anxious not to see his spiritual movement fall into the same trap. So even before this thing with the four sannyasis happened, it was already in Prabhupada's mind to create this governing body. And in fact, we have recently, within the last 6 years anyway, discovered the last will and testament of the last will of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. as it was recorded and witnessed by 4 of his disciples on the 31st of December 1936. So it was just a few hours before he left the planet. And there's 12 items listed in that will. And the second one is form a governing body of 10 to 12 persons to manage the mission's work. And he also mentions that Kunja Baba will remain as the manager until the end of his life. So it's not equivocal, it's very clear that the role that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati himself had as the Acharya was the spiritual leadership of the organization. The role that Kunja Babu had as the manager was the material side of it, if you like, the logistics of it. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said that he should continue on, because he was actually an expert manager. However, his own role as the spiritual leader, that had to be replaced, or it had to be, passed on, if you like. And therefore, he didn't want to pass it on to any single one person, but rather he said, you form a governing body and they should act together, make all decisions jointly. And in that way, then gradually, and as Prabhupada said, his idea was that by cooperating together in the future, by their own natural spiritual potency, their spiritual understanding and ability, some would come out, as prominent. And then they would automatically be recognized as what Prabhupada called a self-effulgent Acharya. So that was his idea. And as Prabhupada said, that by not obeying that instruction in that will, that last instruction, everything fell apart. And Prabhupada had to go through the extreme discomfort of seeing everything that they worked for 15 to 20 years just disintegrate. So he was lamenting, and he was trying to figure out how to rectify that. So Prabhupada's idea in forming ISKCON was to repeat all the same things that his spiritual master had given. It was like a reconstitution, if you like, of the Gaudiya Math. And at the same time, try to ensure that the fate of the organization didn't go the same way as his spiritual master's organization. So he formed a GBC early on, even when the devotees were not really qualified to be in it, or qualified for the roles that were assigned to the GBC. Jagadish Prabhu was made a GBC in that first batch. He'd only been in the movement 1 year. You can't imagine putting a 1 year devotee now in charge of all countries. But in those days, it had to be done. And Prabhupada knew that there was no other way. You can't hire managers. He said, we can't bring men from outside. It has to be done by all our own men. And by that, he meant his own disciples, because even his own godbrothers he didn't trust with their understanding, of how to spread Krishna consciousness. Many of them were very qualified, philosophically speaking, deep realizations like Sridhar Maharaj. Prabhupada said that, he had realizations that would make you faint. Because that is not saying that it made him faint, it would have made us faint. But Prabhupada said he was practically like my own Shiksha Guru, so he definitely saw him as an elder godbrother. And they would have philosophical discussions and get deeper and deeper realizations of it. Nevertheless, Prabhupada was not hesitant to let us know that he had a misunderstanding about the preaching aspects. Although he was philosophically highly qualified, he had misunderstood the instructions of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He'd been a main player in the breakup of the Gaudiya Math by supporting one man to become the next Acharya. And when that man was exposed as being fallen, they were left high and dry. And then he pulled out. And then all the sannyasis basically started declaring themselves as being individual acharyas. And they all went their own way. So Prabhupada was very, very mindful. And he was attempting to create something which would perpetuate way into the future for many, many generations. Of course, he did mention at one point, although we've never been able to find this exact quote, that we should study the Catholic Church and see how they structure themselves and how they do things. not philosophically, but the fact that they've been around for 1,500 years is a bit of a credit. Yeah, they're still highly organized. They've still got millions and billions of followers, maybe 1 billion followers. So they must be doing some things okay. And Prabhupada felt that we could study that and see. But he gave a basic structure in his ISKCON organization. And the leadership of it was intended or was based on one principle: cooperation. There wasn't going to be any one single individual that was going to be made an acharya, as they do in most of the Gaudiya maths now, since the breakup, to avoid, the fallout that they had after Bhaktisiddhanta's departure. Then each of the Gaudiya maths, generally they have a standard where they have one acharya, and even if there are other members of the mat which are more qualified or senior, maybe been around longer, but according to the previous acharya, he appoints the new acharya, and that one